off the coast of Gyeonggi, Chilcheonryang. Dawn of July 16, 1597, the Joseon Navy faced the most devastating defeat in its history. The main Joseon fleet, led by Won Gyun, was ambushed by the Japanese Navy and annihilated. Over 160 warships burned or sank, and thousands of sailors lost their lives. The sea was covered with broken masts and oar fragments. Between the wooden pieces swaying in the waves, the names of fallen comrades disappeared. After Chilcheonryang, the sea fell silent for a while. It wasn't merely a physical defeat. It was the moment when the pride of the Joseon Navy, built through 23 victories in 23 battles over 4 years, collapsed. The glory that had been displayed at Hansando, Myeongnyang, and Busampo turned to ash overnight. And then the appointment letter came again to Yi Sun-sin, who had been serving as a common soldier in white. However, all he received was that single letter of appointment. No ships, no soldiers, no weapons, not even grain. What remained were just 13 warships. There were no turtle ships. The soldiers were terrified by defeat and fleeing, and the people had no faith in the Navy. Yi Sun-sin spent the first few days quietly. He spared his words. In his war diary, it is written, "What is there to say?" But his silence was not surrender. It was a time of reorganization. He went around finding scattered civilians and scraping together grain. He collected and repaired abandoned weapons and fixed broken ships. Most importantly, he had to win back the hearts of the soldiers who had fled. Yi Sun-sin did not interrogate the soldiers. Instead, he rode with them and cooked rice with them. Rather than saying, "We start again," he raised the military flag at the same time every morning and beat the drums. Action came before words. 13 remaining warships, by any measure, an impossible number. The court ordered, "Disband the Navy and come up to land." Realistically, it was a rational judgment. What could you do with 13 ships? But Yi Sun-sin was different. For him, there was something more important than the number of ships. The grain of unbroken people remained, and the eye that could read the sea remained. The flow of currents, the direction of winds, the location of reefs, knowledge gained from 4 years of navigating the South Sea, all of it lived in his mind. The military flag rose again at Usuyeong. The drum beats that initially stuttered gradually found their rhythm. The soldiers' steps began to align bit by bit. The soldiers who had fled returned one by one. They didn't speak, but they saw something in Yi Sun-sin's eyes. We remember the night of defeat, but we choose not to dwell in that night. We will not forget the tragedy of Chilcheonryang, but we will prove it is not our end. One evening, a soldier asked, "Are 13 ships enough?" Yi Sun-sin looked at the sea for a moment and replied, "It's not the number of ships, but the hearts of people that come first." Those words spread throughout Usuyeong, the hearts of people. It wasn't an abstract slogan. Waking up at the same time every morning, cleaning the gun positions, repeating loading. Drills, these concrete actions gathered scattered hearts into one. The night of Chilcheonryang was deep and dark, but the dawn at Usuyeong was quietly breaking. The morning cooking smoke rising from 13 ships. It wasn't simply meal preparation. It was a signal that we had risen again. Defeat had knocked us down, but at the same time, it had hardened something within us. We discarded unnecessary arrogance and stripped away pretense. What remained was only the essence. What we needed, what we had to protect, it was now clear. The night had passed. We had risen again. It was hardly a number you could call an army. 13 warships, just over 1,000 soldiers. Weapons were scarce, gunpowder insufficient. Court support had ceased, and the people's trust had hit rock bottom. But Yi Sun-sin didn't fixate on numbers. He began to create order. The essence of an army is not numbers, but order. When many people move separately, they're a crowd. When few people move as one, they're an army. Yi Sun-sin didn't scold the soldiers. Instead, he showed them the way. Every morning, he stood in front of the gun position himself. How to measure gunpowder, how to load ammunition, how to light the fuse. One by one, slowly but precisely, he demonstrated, "Watch, this is how it's done." It was action, not words. Practice, not theory. Seeing the commander personally handling the cannons, the soldiers gradually changed. Fear remained, but within that fear, a belief that they could do something began to sprout. He taught the soldiers about the structure of the panoxion. Look at the bottom of our ship. It's wide and flat. This absorbs the recoil of cannons. Japanese ships are fast but narrow. If they load many cannons, they lose balance. The soldiers began to see the ships they were boarding in a new light. This wasn't just a lump of wood. The hull, joined with oak nails, was designed to absorb impact. The two-level deck structure separated gunners and rowers to increase efficiency. Gun ports opened in all directions, enabled firing from any angle. We are not ships, but floating artillery platforms. This statement from Yi Sun-sin was the core of the strategy. The Japanese Navy's strength lay in approaching quickly and engaging in boarding combat. When soldiers armed with muskets climbed onto the deck for close combat, their winning rate was high. But the Joseon Navy's tactics were different, sinking enemy ships with cannon fire from a distance, not allowing them to approach. For this, accurate shooting and quick reloading were essential. The soldiers entered daily repetitive training. Load, aim, fire. Load, aim, fire again. At first, they were clumsy. They spilled gunpowder, missed the fuse, and their aim went astray. But after 1 week, 2 weeks, it began to feel natural. Yi Sun-sin personally timed them and encouraged good. 3 breaths faster than yesterday. The soldiers felt they were improving. What seemed impossible gradually became possible. They thoroughly learned the characteristics of each weapon. The Cheonja-chongtong had a long range for distant use, the Jija-chongtong for medium range, Hyanja-chongtong for close range, and Sungja-chongtong for the closest defense. The Joran fired multiple small iron bullets to sweep enemy decks, knowing each weapon's purpose and using them appropriately. According to distance, this was how to maximize firepower efficiency. The soldiers learned to gauge the distance to enemy ships by eye, and Yi Sun-sin submitted a memorial to the court, the famous 12 ships memorial. I still have 12 warships left. If we fight prepared to die, we can defend successfully. If the Navy is disbanded, the enemy will go straight through Hanam to the Han River. This memorial wasn't a simple report. It was a declaration that we will not give up, that we can fight. Hearing the contents of this memorial, the soldiers straightened their backs. If the commander said so to the court, then we must do the same. If we're prepared to die, we can defend. Those words weren't just slogans. Daily training and daily preparation backed them up. Fear binds us like chains. Memories of defeat, overwhelming enemy numbers, insufficient resources, all of it weighed down the mind. But practice and order break those chains. When you confirm with your body that you can do it, fear gradually retreats. When you know how to fire cannons, when you understand the ship's structure, when your comrade repeats the same movements beside you, we were not alone. The 13 ships were no longer separate vessels. They were connected by a single thread of will, moving in unison to flag signals, firing cannons to the drumbeat, responding to battle cries while rowing one organism. On the morning of departure for Oldulmak, the soldiers' faces had changed. They were still afraid. But within that fear, something solid had taken root. We were ready. 13 ships, a small number. But it was no longer a weakness. It was the optimal size for us to move as one, a size where signals could be clearly transmitted, orders immediately executed, and each other's movements precisely understood. We were not many, but we were precise. Not slow and not wavering. 13 ships became a single thread of will heading toward Oldulmak. The sea doesn't record with words. Instead, it records with terrain. Oldulmak, today's Myeongnyang Strait. This place is a narrow waterway between Jindo and Haenam. The width at its narrowest point is about 300 meters. However, the amount of water that must pass through this narrow passage is enormous. The vast waters of the South Sea rush into this narrow neck at high tide. As enormous water pressure concentrates into a narrow space, the current becomes extremely fast, 6 meters per second, or about 11 knots in nautical terms. This is faster than the speed of ships at that time. Water doesn't flow only in straight lines. It creates whirlpools, following underwater reefs and terrain formations. These eddies twist a ship's direction at will. Even experienced navigators tense up when passing through here. More important is the transition between high and low tides. Twice a day, the sea's flow completely reverses. Water rushing north stops, a brief stillness follows, then, this time it races south. Locals called this transitional moment Muldori water turning. Yi Sun-sin knew this sea. For 4 years navigating the South Sea, he had observed this waterway countless times. The timing of high tides, the strength of currents, the location of reefs, points where whirlpools form, all of it, was drawn as a map in his mind. We fight at Oldulmak. Hearing this decision, his subordinates were initially puzzled. Oldulmak is a dangerous place. Even our ships are difficult to handle there, and we're going to fight there. But after hearing Yi Sun-sin's explanation, they understood. The enemy is numerous. They will surround us in the open sea. But in a narrow passage, it's different. Many ships become a hindrance instead. The strategy was clear. Use the narrow terrain to nullify the enemy's numerical advantage. In the open sea, we would be surrounded. But in the narrow passage, the enemy would tangle themselves. Yi Sun-sin calculated the tide times. He predicted the day the Japanese Navy would attack and identified the high tide timing for that day. He knew they would sail north riding the high tide. Riding on the back of high tide makes ships faster and allows soldiers to conserve strength. They will come riding the high tide. We wait for that moment. The Joseon Navy positioned itself north of Oldalmak, the space just after passing through the narrow passage. Here we would meet the enemy surging from the south. The enemy's formation would be disrupted, passing through the narrow passage, while we would meet them in an organized state. The tide calculation was even more precise. Near the end of high tide, just before the water turns, at this time the enemy rushes in at maximum speed, riding the last strength of the high tide, charging forward unstoppably. But as the battle begins and time passes, the water turns. The flow stops, and after that brief stillness, the water begins to flow in the opposite direction. Water rushing north now races south. This was the key to victory. Enemy ships are charging north, but suddenly the water pulls them south. The bow points north, but the ship is pushed south. No matter how hard they row, the ship either stays in place or is pushed back. Enemy ships trapped in the narrow passage become even more confused. Ships in front stop, pushed by the current, while following ships continue to be pushed forward. Ships collide, sails and oars tangle. Hundreds of ships block each other in the narrow valley. Our task was simple. Guard the gun positions, measure the range, and wait for that moment. Don't go out rashly. Don't go in too deep. At precisely the position advantageous to us, at precisely the time advantageous to us, we open fire. Yi Sun-sin repeatedly told the soldiers, "I choose the position. The sea hands over the timing. You just fire the cannons." This statement relieved the soldiers' burden. They didn't need to understand complex strategies. The commander would place us in the right position. The sea would create the right time. We just do what we practiced. We examine the terrain of Oldalmak again. Reefs are scattered and currents swirl unpredictably. This is a trap for the enemy, but a stage for us. We spent 4 years on this stage. We knew which rocks were where, at which points the current broke. The sea is not on our side. The sea takes no one's side. But there's a difference between those who understand the sea and those who don't. Oldalmak is equally difficult for all, but for the prepared, it's predictable. For the unprepared, it's chaos. Yi Sun-sin gave his final instruction: when the water turns, fire the cannons. Before then, just maintain distance. It was clear. It was specific. The soldiers nodded. We know Oldalmak, we know the tide times, we know what we must do. The sea began to write sentences of tactics. War is not simply a battle of courage. It's a competition of technology and structure. That 13 ships held off hundreds at Myeongnyang was not a miracle, but a difference in design. Let's first examine the Japanese Atakabun. These ships were fast and agile. With narrow and long hulls, their speed cutting through water was high. When rowers matched their rhythm, they could close distances in an instant. But speed came with a price. The narrow hull had an unstable center of gravity. It was difficult to mount multiple large cannons. When cannons fired, the recoil shook the entire ship, risking loss of balance. Therefore, the Japanese Navy didn't mount many cannons. Instead, they were optimized for boarding combat. Tactics of approaching quickly, pulling enemy ships, with grappling hooks and soldiers armed with muskets jumping onto decks. Musket accuracy was high, and samurai skilled in swordsmanship were strong in close combat. These tactics were effective in most naval battles. In Chinese coastal waters, in Southeast Asian seas, the Japanese Navy won this way. Once they approached quickly and seized the enemy's deck, the battle was over. But Joseon's Panoxon was different. The Panoxion's design philosophy was different from the start. This was a ship for artillery warfare. The hull was wider and flatter than the Atakabun. This wide bottom was a platform to absorb cannon recoil. The hull's joining method was also unique. Thick planks made of oak were connected with wooden nails, not iron nails. Wooden nails were more flexible than iron nails. When impact was applied, they bent slightly, dispersing the force. Whether meeting waves or firing cannons, the entire ship responded elastically. The two-level structure was also important. Rowers on the lower level, gunners and archers on the upper level. This separation maximized efficiency. Rowers could focus solely on navigation, gunners solely on shooting. Looking at the gunport arrangement reveals the design philosophy clearly. Gunports were opened in all directions, port, starboard, bow, stern. They could respond immediately, regardless of which direction the enemy came from. No need to turn the ship, just turn the cannons. The variety of cannons was also diverse. Cheonja-chongtong, Chija-chongtong, Hyunja-chongtong, Seungja-chongtong, and Joran. Each had different ranges and purposes. Cheonja-chongtong was the largest cannon, range about 600 meters. It fired large iron bullets to directly strike enemy ship hulls. When hit, holes opened in the hull and water flooded in. Jija-chongtong was a medium cannon with a range of about 400 meters. This was used most frequently. The balance of size and power made it suitable for continuous firing. Hyunja-chongtong was for close range, about 200 meters, used when the enemy approached closely. Fast loading speed made it advantageous in urgent situations. Seungja-chongtong was for the closest defense. Short range but great destructive power. The final line of defense when the enemy was almost attached to the ship. Joran was a unique weapon. A shotgun method firing multiple small iron bullets at once. Accuracy was poor, but it swept a wide area, effective for suppressing soldiers on enemy decks. The combination of these weapons was important. At long range, strike the hull with Cheonja and Jija. At medium range, at Hyunja. When they come close, sweep the deck with Seungja and Joran, changing weapons according to distance while pouring endless artillery fire. The quality of gunpowder was also different. Joseon's gunpowder precisely controlled the ratio of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. While having strong explosive power, the combustion rate was stable. Accidents of gun barrels overheating or exploding were rare. The loading system was also efficient. Just load pre-prepared gunpowder packages and ammunition in order. A skilled gunner could reload within 1 minute. This was very fast for that time. In contrast, Japanese muskets, while excellent as individual firearms, had limitations as naval guns. Short range and difficult to hit targets on swaying decks. Above all, they couldn't destroy ships themselves. Muskets made people tremble, but Chongtong shook the sea. At Myeongnyang, this difference was decisive. When the Japanese Navy tried to approach for boarding combat, the Joseon Navy maintained distance and fired cannons. Japanese ships had to break through artillery fire, but the narrow strait and fierce currents made it impossible. Imagine a burning ship. When a cannonball lodges in the wooden hull, shrapnel flies and flames ignite. Sails, being dry cloth, catch fire instantly. When gunpowder or oil on deck explodes, the entire ship is engulfed in flames. Fire at sea is even more horrific. There's nowhere to escape. Jump into the water and be swept away by currents, stay on the ship and burn. Smoke and screams, explosions, collapsing masts. It wasn't superiority of technology. Design suited to the environment determined victory or defeat. The Japanese Navy's tactics were optimized for open seas, calm weather, and free maneuverability. The Joseon Navy's tactics were optimized for narrow straits, fierce currents, and long-range artillery. Oldolmak was an environment favorable to the Joseon Navy. There we fought with ships and weapons favorable to the Joseon Navy. At this moment, numbers lost their power before structure. September 1597. In the court, a debate was taking place. Should the Navy be disbanded or maintained? Reality was bleak. After the defeat at Chilcheonryang, only 12 warships remained. Troops numbered just over 1,000. Weapons and grain were woefully insufficient. Meanwhile, the Japanese Navy possessed hundreds of warships. Many ministers argued, maintaining the Navy is a waste of resources. What can 12 ships accomplish? Better to have troops. Join the army and defend on land that's realistic. On the surface, it was a rational argument. By numbers, there was no chance of winning. Economically, the cost of maintaining the Navy was considerable. Repairing ships, making weapons, feeding soldiers, everything required money and resources. But Yi Sun-sin's thinking was different. He spread out the map and thought, what would happen if the Navy disappeared? Control of the Yellow Sea and South Sea would completely pass to the Japanese Navy. They could sail north along the west coast unimpeded. Hanam's granary region, open to the sea, would be difficult to defend. If Japanese forces landed and plundered grain, supply to the entire Joseon army would be cut off. More serious was the mouth of the Han River. If the Japanese Navy, having seized the sea, sailed up the Han River, Hanyang would be immediately threatened. Even if defense lines were established by land, they couldn't stop enemies approaching from the rear by sea. The Navy wasn't simply a force fighting at sea. It was Joseon's maritime defense line, the protector of supply routes and a strategic counterbalance. Yi Sun-sin picked up his brush and wrote a memorial that would go down in history. I still have 12 warships left. He didn't hide the numbers. He stated things as they were. 12 ships, a small number. But he didn't stop there. If we fight prepared to die, we can defend successfully. This wasn't blind optimism. Yi Sun-sin knew Oldelmak's terrain, knew the tides, knew the Panoxion's capabilities. He had calculated, prepared, and seen the possibility. And he continued with the most important sentence. If the Navy is disbanded, the enemy will go straight through Hanum to the Han River. This wasn't mere prediction, but strategic analysis. He clearly presented the scenario after the Navy's disappearance. He forced the court ministers to choose, avoid the immediate difficulty and face a greater catastrophe later, or maintain the defense line despite current hardships. As long as I live, the enemy will not underestimate us. The final sentence was determination, a promise, not a threat but conviction. Yi Sun-sin knew what he could do and clearly communicated it to the court. This memorial moved the court. Arguments for disbanding the Navy subsided, though there was no great support, at least. The order to disband the Navy was not issued. But this memorial wasn't only for the court, it was also for the soldiers. When the memorial's contents were conveyed to the Usuyong camp, the soldiers' eyes changed. The commander said that to the court, that we can fight, that we can defend. Then maybe it's really possible. The commander doesn't lie. If he said we can do it, there must be a way. The soldiers focused more on training. Hands became more careful when cleaning cannons. More strength went into rowing. They answered not with words, but with actions. If the commander believes in us, we will believe in the commander. A single memorial restored the army's morale. Not the power of words, but the power of truth. Yi Sun-sin didn't give false hope. He acknowledged the difficulty, didn't hide the danger, but he said it wasn't impossible, there was a way we could do it. And he said the most important thing, why this battle matters, what we're protecting. Not simply a matter of 12 ships, but the lifeline of the nation at stake. The soldiers now knew why we fought at Oldelmak. This wasn't battle, but guarding a gateway. If we defend this sea, Hanum is protected. If Hanum is protected, Joseon is protected. One memorial saved the Navy from disbandment, but that was just the beginning. The real proof had to be shown on the battlefield, had to be shown with results, not words. Yi Sun-sin knew there was nowhere left to retreat. He had to keep the promise made in the memorial, but he wasn't afraid, because he was prepared. The nation's lifeline depended on the sea, and the sea's fate depended on these 12 ships. Yi Sun-sin accepted that weight, and the soldiers accepted it together. We decided not to flee. We decided to fight. We decided to defend. Dawn of September 16, 1597, fog hung thick over Oldelmak. 13. Joseon warships formed a line through the passage. The flagship at the front, Yi Sun-sin commanding personally. The drum beats 3 times. The flag rises. The signal is clear. Advance. The soldiers were calm. Fear remained, but it wasn't the terror that freezes the body, it was the tension that sharpens the mind. We had practiced. We were prepared. Now we just do what we need to do. From the south, the Japanese armada appeared. The vanguard led by Kurashima Michifusa, followed by the fleets of Todo Takatora and Wakizaka Yasuharu. The exact number was unclear, but clearly hundreds of ships. Sails covered the sea, oars struck the water. The Japanese Navy was confident. They had experience annihilating the Joseon Navy at Chilchonryang. Now only 13 ships remained. Numerical superiority was overwhelming. Charge quickly, surround them, finish with boarding combat. Familiar tactics. But Yi Sun-sin didn't move as they expected. He didn't flee, but he didn't charge either. The 13 ships maintained their line formation while slowly advancing, measuring distance to the enemy, controlling speed, moving to precisely the planned position. Many tactical manuals talk about luring tactics, lure the enemy into a trap. But at Myeongnyang, no luring was necessary. The terrain itself was the trap. The Japanese Navy had no choice but to enter Oldelmak. To attack us, they had to pass through this narrow passage. They sailed north riding the high tide, riding the power of water, rushing forward quickly. The Joseon Navy avoided the initial collision. When enemy ships approached, they retreated slightly, but they weren't fleeing. They were adjusting distance, maintaining the range advantageous to us. The Japanese vanguard rode faster. They thought they were chasing a fleeing enemy. They came deeper into the narrow passage. Following ships also increased speed. Yi Sun-sin was calculating the tide. The end of high tide was approaching. Just a little more. Wait just a little longer. The moment of water turning came. A brief stillness. The water stopped. It was as if the sea held its breath. Then Yi Sun-sin's signal fell. The flag came down, the drum beat again. 3, 4, 5 times. All forces commenced firing. Gun ports opened. Cheonja Chongtong roared first. Large iron bullets flew with flames, the roar cutting through air. They lodged in the Japanese vanguard's hull. Wood split, shrapnel flew. Jija Chongtong followed. Continuously fired cannonballs. 1, 2, 3. Firepower from 13 ships firing in unison. Flames and smoke covered the sea. Hyunja Chongtong and Sungja Chongtong joined as distance closed. Joran scattered iron fragments. Soldiers standing on Japanese ship decks fell. The Japanese Navy was flustered. Different from expectations. Joseon ships didn't flee but fought back, and that firepower was beyond imagination. Ships were destroyed, caught fire, soldiers fell into water. Kurashima Michifusa moved forward himself. Driving his flagship, he charged. He ordered the musketeers fire. But musket range was short, and hitting targets from swaying ships was difficult. The Joseon Navy kept firing cannons. Load, aim, fire. Load again, aim, fire. Exactly as practiced in repetitive training. The gunners were calm, not panicking, just executing what they practiced. It wasn't heroic tales, not individual valor. It was the Army's rhythm, systematic, repetitive, predictable movements. Each person performed their role precisely. Rowers rowed, maintaining the ship's position, advancing or retreating according to orders. Gunners fired cannons, measuring range, aiming, shooting. Archers shot arrows to suppress enemies on decks. Commanders sent signals, coordinating overall movements. The head of the Japanese armada wavered. As the vanguard collapsed, following ships became confused. Should we advance or retreat? Maintaining formation in the narrow passage was difficult, and the ebb tide began. The flow reversed. Water rushing north now began racing south. Japanese ships suddenly started being pushed backward. Bows pointed north, but ships were dragged south. The Joseon Navy had waited for this moment. They closed the distance, increased artillery fire density, continued continuous firing. The enemy couldn't respond. Swept by currents, unable to control their ships. There was an order not to covet ramming. Don't allow boarding combat. Maintain distance, just fire cannons. The soldiers followed orders. When enemy ships tried to approach, they rowed to widen the distance. Numbers couldn't penetrate the artillery fire. Many ships existed, but in the narrow passage, only a few could fight simultaneously. Hundreds of ships behind were blocked by ships in front, unable to do anything. Battlefield time flows differently. Was it several hours or all day? The soldiers moved like machines. Fatigue existed, but they couldn't stop. Fire cannons, load, fire again. Kurashima Michifusa's flagship began to burn, hit by multiple cannonballs. Fire caught on deck, sails blazed. He tried to fight to the end, but the ship was sinking. When the vanguard collapsed, the entire Japanese Navy wavered. Retreat orders came down. But turning hundreds of ships around in the narrow passage was impossible. Confusion intensified. Some ships tried to retreat, others still tried to advance. Command transmission wasn't working properly. The Joseon Navy didn't pursue. There was no need. The enemy was collapsing on their own. We just had to hold our position and fire cannons. Smoke rose from burning ships. Black smoke covered the sky. Broken wooden pieces floated in the sea. Screams and flames, sounds of collapse mixed together. The Japanese Navy withdrew. But it wasn't an orderly retreat, it was closer to flight. Ships pushed each other, trying to escape the narrow passage. Some ships were damaged, colliding with reefs. Some sank caught in whirlpools. When the battle ended, the contrast in damage was stark. Joseon Navy, no ship damage. Few casualties. All 13 ships remained intact. Japanese Navy, many sunk and heavily damaged. Thousands of casualties. The exact number varies by record, but at least 30 ships were sunk or rendered unable to fight. Vanguard Commander Kurashima Michifusa killed. Many ships in the main fleet were also damaged and needed repair. This wasn't coincidence, not luck. They chose the right position, fought in the narrow strait called Oldelmak. In the open sea, we would have been surrounded. But in the narrow passage, the enemy's numbers were meaningless. They chose the right time, calculated when the water turns, started battle at the end of high tide, throwing the enemy into chaos when it switched to ebb tide. They properly utilized structure. The Panoxion's wide deck and gun ports in all directions, various types of changtong. All of it was optimized for artillery warfare. They properly used firepower. Changed weapons according to distance, pressured with continuous firing. Didn't allow boarding combat. They maintained trained composure. Soldiers didn't panic. Each performed their role precisely. Collective order created victory more than individual heroism. The necessity created by the sum of all these elements. The sun set. The water at Oldelmak still flowed fiercely, but now the sea was defended by us. The soldiers were exhausted, arms weak, voices hoarse, but their eyes were alive. We did it. With 13 ships, we held off hundreds. Yi Sun-sin stood quietly. He didn't call out victory cheers, didn't make exaggerated celebrations. He just looked at the soldiers and nodded. You worked hard. Those brief words were enough. Hundreds of years after the Battle of Myeongnyang ended, Japanese Admiral Togo Heihachiro said, "Some people compare me to Admiral Nelson, but the truly great admiral is Yi Sun-sin. I cannot be compared to him." Togo was a hero who defeated the Baltic Fleet in the Russo-Japanese War. Why did such a person consider Yi Sun-sin the greatest? What he saw wasn't the dance of swords, not individual valor. It was the writing of the sea, the completeness of strategy. If we remember Myeongnyang simply as a battle where 13 ships defeated hundreds, we miss the essence. If we see it only as a reversal of numbers, it appears to be a miracle or good fortune. But Myeongnyang wasn't a miracle. It was a battle where context nullified numbers. What is context? It's the environment created by terrain, time, structure, and preparation. Context of terrain, the narrow strait called Oldelmak. Here, many ships are actually disadvantageous. No space to deploy formations, they hinder each other. In the open sea, the result would have been different. Context of time, Moldori, the turning of tides. The moment changing from high to low tide, enemy ships lose control. At a different time, the result would have been different. Context of structure. The Panoxion and Chongtong system, specialized for artillery warfare, suppressing the Japanese Navy, strong in boarding combat from a distance. With different ships and weapons, the result would have been different. Context of preparation. Shooting skills embodied through repetitive training, knowledge of the waters accumulated over 4 years, unwavering military discipline and order. Without such preparation, the result would have been different. Yi Sun-sin's greatness lay in reading and utilizing all this context. He didn't just do his best with given resources. He created an environment where resources would work advantageously. Many people remember Yi Sun-sin as a hero, but if we see him only as a brave general, we underestimate his true ability. Yi Sun-sin was a strategist, a geographer reading terrain, a scientist calculating tides, an engineer designing weapon systems, a psychologist understanding human hearts, and above all, he was an architect of context. The lesson of Myeongnyang remains valid today. We're often overwhelmed by numbers. When we think the opponent has more resources, a larger organization, greater power, we give up in advance. But Myeongnyang asks, did you create context? This doesn't mean numbers aren't important, nor that resources aren't needed, but that victory or defeat isn't determined by numbers. Alone, Myeongnyang proves that context can overwhelm numbers. In business, we see startups defeating large corporations. Resources are overwhelmingly fewer, but they utilize the context of speed, the context of innovation, the context of focus. In sports, we see weak teams defeating strong ones. Individual player abilities may be inferior, but they utilize the context of tactics, the context of home field, the context of teamwork. The same is true in individual lives. We all fight with insufficient resources, not enough time, money, or opportunities. But we have the power to choose where to fight, when to fight, how to fight. Where is your sea? This is asking, where is your Oldelmak? Where is the terrain favorable to you? Where is the environment where your strengths shine? Many people fight on battlefields chosen by opponents. By the opponent's rules, in places advantageous to the opponent. At times, the opponent wants, then numbers directly become results. But what if you can choose the battlefield? If you can change the rules, if you can control the timing, context changes. Do you know your gateway? A gateway is a critical point. Even if you can't control everything, defending the decisive point protects the whole. Isun Sin New Oldelmak was such a gateway. If we defend only here, Honam is protected. If Honam is protected, Joseon is protected. What is your gateway? You can't fight on all fronts. But if you defend the critical front, that's enough. Finding that gateway is strategy. Myeongnang's final lesson is about preparation. Preparation turns chance into inevitability. Some people call Myeongnang's victory luck. The weather was good, the tide was right, the enemy made mistakes. But these aren't coincidences. Weather can be predicted. Tides can be calculated. It must have been tedious work. Daily accumulation, neither glamorous nor dramatic. But that tedious preparation shown at the moment of Myeongnyang, all those things that seemed like chance, were actually the result of long preparation.